The White Death, sweet poison. Sugar has been referred to by many names, with most of them pointing out how it's harmful and dangerous to the human body. Many people today consider sugar as extremely unhealthy and dangerous and the source of all evil. And a lot of people have made it a priority to completely eliminate sugar from their lives. But in this video, we're going to put on our calm thinking hats and examine one of the most popular accusations against sugar, the accusation that it causes cancer. And unfortunately, the answer is a little bit more complex than a simple yes or no. So let's get cracking. First of all, I want to quickly go over what sugar actually is so that we're all on the same page. The term sugar can actually cover a lot of different substances. Sugars are a category, not a single substance. For the context of this video, when we'll be referring to the traditional table sugar, we'll be referring to it as table sugar or sucrose, which is its proper scientific name. Now, sucrose is what we call a disaccharide, meaning that it consists of two monosaccharides. Now, monosaccharides are the simplest form of all sugars. There's a lot of them, but the ones that we actually care about are three: glucose, fructose, and galactose. In fact, galactose is never actually found by itself in foods, so let's just forget about that. So what we actually care about are fructose and glucose. Now, one molecule of table sugar or sucrose consists of one molecule of glucose and one molecule of fructose, hence disaccharide. Now, simple sugars are the main source of energy for humans. Even when we consume complex carbohydrates like potatoes, rice, bread, all that stuff, the body will break them down into simple sugars, primarily glucose. Now, one major reason as to why many people seem to think that sugar causes cancer is because cancer cells utilize sugar for energy. However, let's nip this in the bud right off the bat. Yes, cancer cells do utilize sugar for energy. In fact, all cells do. According to some research, cancer cells actually use about 50 to 100 times more sugar than normal healthy cells. But the thing is, as we just mentioned, all carbohydrates eventually turn into sugar in the body. Even if you were to completely cut out all added sugar, like none, okay? You were having no added sugar in your diet. All other carb sources like bread, potatoes, rice, pasta would provide the body with a source of complex carbohydrates that it would then break down into sugar. In fact, you wouldn't even have to eat carbohydrates. Amino acids from protein can also be converted into glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis. And even some fatty acids can be converted into glucose under some special circumstances. Bottom line is, your body will eventually get the glucose it needs because it's the main energy source for the body. So cutting out table sugar or any other form of sugar wouldn't really do much. Another important thing to mention here is that sugar is not officially classified as a carcinogen by the IARC, or the International Agency for Research on Cancer. Now, I realize that a lot of people don't necessarily trust the World Health Organization, which is the parent organization that the IARC works under, nor follow its every word like gospel. So that's also something to keep in mind. The fact that sugar is not classified as a carcinogenic is important. Now, just because table sugar isn't considered to be a carcinogen does not necessarily mean that it can't be linked to cancer. There's actually a few possible ways that sugar could be connected with cancer. The first one has to do with insulin. There's actually a lot of research that suggests that high levels of insulin in the body can be linked to a higher risk of cancer. Insulin is, of course, the hormone responsible for transferring sugar or glucose from the blood into the tissues. Naturally, eating sugar and any other form of carbohydrates will raise insulin. So, by eating a lot of table sugar, we naturally cause our insulin to raise more and thus increase our odds of developing cancer, correct? Not so fast. It's not that simple. First of all, the argument that, well, if you eat a lot of sugar, then it's going to be bad for you is really weak because, well, anything that you eat in excess is probably going to be bad for you. Anything in excess can be bad. But just because someone consumes a lot of added sugar does not necessarily mean that their insulin levels are going to be chronically elevated. Insulin spikes are normal. In fact, they are part of our body's digestive process. Having chronically elevated insulin levels comes from the body creating more insulin than what is considered healthy. Why? Because for some reason or another, the tissues become less sensitive to insulin, thus rejecting its effect. Why? Well, ultimately, it comes down to the person consuming more than what their body needs. So the body fights back. It resists glucose from entering into the tissues. in trying to keep homeostasis. It's trying to keep itself stable. This leads to elevated levels of glucose and insulin in the blood. And this is what we call insulin resistance. And after a certain level, we call that diabetes. So, two major points here. One, it's not eating table sugar that's the problem. It's eating more than you need for a prolonged period of time. And number two, it's not just table sugar, it's all forms of carbohydrates. Remember, all carbohydrates will turn into sugar. Now, does this mean that carbs are bad? No, it doesn't. It just highlights the fact that overconsumption is the problem, not sugar itself, at least in this specific regard. One big bowl of pasta, which has very little sugar, will still raise insulin much more than a tablespoon of sugar, which is, for all intents and purposes, 100% sugar. Yes, the insulin spike will be much slower and more gradual from the bowl of pasta, but it's still gonna be a much bigger one. Now, while sugar might not cause cancer directly or be considered a carcinogenic per se, there is one thing that sugar is absolutely fantastic at, and that's making you fat. Obesity is actually an extremely important risk factor for a lot of types of cancer. And there's a lot of reasons why obesity might be linked to cancer risk. One of those reasons being the one we just mentioned. Obesity almost always leads to an increase in circulating insulin levels because the body is rejecting more energy. It doesn't need it. Another reason is the fact that obesity actually promotes some inflammatory conditions and might be in fact a low-grade inflammatory condition itself. For example, the hormone leptin is actually pro-inflammatory. Now, leptin is the hormone that is responsible for making us feel full. And we usually refer to leptin as a good thing, as a good hormone. But too much of it has actually been linked to a higher cancer risk. And leptin is actually produced by fat cells. So I'm sure that you can do the math by yourselves. Fat tissue also produces estrogen, and excess amounts of estrogen have been linked to some forms of cancer. The bottom line is that obesity is an extremely important risk factor for developing cancer. And of course, eating tons of added sugar is a great way to make yourself fat, or at the very least prevent yourself from losing weight if you need to. This is because sugar is pretty much useless in terms of satiety. It doesn't fill you up, while at the same time providing calories. 4 calories per gram to be exact. Added sugar also has practically zero other nutritional value, and not to mention the fact that it can be addictive to certain people. But again, not everyone who eats added sugar will become obese. It depends on the individual and the rest of their diet. If you're a physically active young person, then you can probably get away with eating added sugar, maybe through a soft drink or eating a muffin every day. On the other hand, if you're a sedentary middle-aged person, then you have to be much more careful with all of these extra added calories because you require much less energy to remain at a stable body weight. Again, overconsumption for the individual is a problem, not sugar itself. Now, there's one more topic that I want to discuss here, and that is the impact of fructose specifically. Now, you might be thinking, oh, fructose, it's naturally found in fruits, so it must be better than sugar, right? Actually, no, it's probably worse. See, fructose is a little bit of a special nutrient. Unlike glucose, which is used for direct energy production, fructose actually needs to be metabolized by the liver. And this metabolic process has actually been linked with a lot of unwanted, unhealthy conditions, like hyperlipidemia, or basically having elevated levels of blood lipids, an increased production of uric acid, an increased risk for non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, as well as non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, and, you guessed it, an increased risk of cancer development when fructose is consumed in excess. And as we mentioned earlier, table sugar consists of both glucose and fructose. So naturally, consuming a lot of table sugar will mean that you consume a lot of fructose. And that's not even mentioning pure fructose sources like high fructose corn syrup. Now you might be wondering how fructose could be so bad if it's naturally found in healthy sources like fruits and honey. Well, the answer is, again, quantity. It's very difficult to consume large amounts of sugar from fruit alone because fruits are high in water and fiber, which will cause you to fill up very quickly. But added sugar and syrups are much easier to consume in large quantities and are much more condensed, thus providing a much higher dose of fructose. Now, as far as direct studies examining the effect of sugar consumption on direct cancer risk, unsurprisingly, the evidence is inconclusive. And I'm not gonna go over all the evidence now. If you wanna do that, I'll link a lot of the studies in the description, and I'm sure that there's a ton more that you can find. Out of 4 systematic reviews that I found, 2 showed an association between a higher consumption of table sugar and cancer, while the other 2 didn't show a positive association. And I found a bunch of primary studies as well. Again, links in the description. So what's the bottom line? Does sugar cause cancer? Well, probably not directly. An excess consumption of sugar can lead to unwanted circumstances that may increase the risk for cancer. You've probably all heard the phrase, the dose makes the poison. And it's absolutely true in this instance. The reality is that sugar won't kill you. It probably won't even hurt you that much if you're careful with it. But it's extremely easy to overconsume on sugar, especially nowadays when it's literally everywhere, and especially because for most people, the rest of their diets aren't that healthy anyways. So adding on an overconsumption of sugar to an already unhealthy diet is a recipe for disaster. So even though in moderation sugar is fine and safe, I would still recommend most people avoiding it whenever possible. And I'm talking about very simple things here, like preferring to use no sugar sweeteners, and no, they won't kill you either, so don't worry about it. Limiting soft drinks and preferring sugar-free ones. Avoiding buying sweets, pastries, and such for the house. It's better to save them for special or social occasions. Preferring to use plain oatmeal and no sugar added breakfast cereal so that you can control the amount of sugar that goes into them. Using honey, which is actually sweeter than sugar and so requires less quantity to get the same amount of sweetness. Reading the labels on packaged foods that you buy. A lot of them are really high in sugar and you might not even be realizing it. And lots of other stuff. It's generally recommended to keep your simple sugar intake below 10% of your total calorie intake. And that's for all simple sugars, whether they come from fruits or candies. So for a 2,500 calorie diet, that would amount to less than 250 calories coming from simple sugars, or less than 62.5 grams of sugar, since 1 gram of sugar provides 4 calories. So in conclusion, table sugar will probably not cause you cancer, nor will it feed cancer cells, at least any more than it would feed regular cells. But cutting back on sugar is always a good idea. The main thing that I want you to pick up from this video is that you don't want to be extreme about it. You don't want to be at any one of the 2 extremes. Now, sure, you could eliminate sugar completely from your diet without any adverse health effects if you do it correctly. But the thing is, you don't need to go that far. Eating some sugar won't hurt you, as long as it's part of an overall healthy diet that promotes a healthy body weight. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Do you eat sugar? Do you think it's the cause of all evil? Do you avoid it like the plague? Let me know down in the comments. If you're interested in more no-nonsense nutrition and health videos, consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.